Well, hello there, and welcome to part 6 of the Jailbreaking Yourself video series I've been putting together. My name is Chris Swift from White Rabbit Hypnosis, whiterabbithypnosis.com, and this video series is a bunch of little tips and tricks I've picked up over the years for feeling better in your life and for just being able to escape from those invisible prisons you might not have known you were in. Today's video is about a technique called the Sedona Method that I learned from Hale Dwoskin in his book of the same title. There's also a movie out there that is available on YouTube. And there are a couple variations of this technique. Larry Crane has a version called Releasing. And Ken Wilber, if I'm not mistaken, I think he also has a version of it. But regardless, these all go back to a guy called Lester Levenson. And it goes back to the same basic idea. And the idea is that the human nervous system is actually able to do more than just express an emotion or repress or suppress an emotion. That the human nervous system is capable of releasing an emotion. And so there's a little exercise that Hale Dwoskin generally will lead an audience through. I'm going to ask you to join me for that in just a moment. And yet I want you to imagine that you are having some kind of unpleasant emotion. Let's say you got fired from a job or something bad happened, but you're experiencing that emotion for a moment. And the idea is, in that moment, you feel like you couldn't let go of it, but then there's a knock at the door, and here comes somebody with a suitcase with $1 million in unmarked, non-sequential bills for you. How does your emotion feel now? How were you able to let go of that? And so a lot of the times when we think about these things, the emotions we have all these stories and things attached to them. But we do have the possibility, the ability in our nervous system of letting go of an emotion. Now, even though that's the case, we might not know exactly how, and that's where this technique really helps. But the first part of this is realizing that it is possible, that you can do it, that something can happen later to completely change your emotional state. Therefore, you have the ability to change that emotional state. So let's forget about that for a moment. What I'd like you to do, if you've got an object around that you can do this where you are, this would be wonderful. Hale Dwoskin will often use a marker or something like that. And I'm just going to ask you to pick up an object that you wouldn't mind dropping, that's not going to break, it's not going to damage things or cause problems. I'm going to use this marker because it's what I have here, sticking with the Hale Dwoskin tradition. And I'm just going to ask you to go ahead and grasp that object. In fact, I want you to grasp it rather tightly. And I want you to notice that after a moment, that begins to feel uncomfortable. And if you held it for long enough, it would begin to feel very familiar. And in fact, this is what we do with emotions all the time. In fact, we might even describe ourselves as being that emotion. I am angry. I am happy. I am sad, or whatever it might be. We identify ourselves with it rather than realizing it's just something that's part of our experience. And so I want you to just release your grip a little and realize you're not attached to that object. The same is true of our emotions. And so what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to prompt you with a question. I'm going to ask you, could you let it go? And then I'm just going to say, just let it go. And I want you to drop it. I want you to just lightly grasp that object. Turn it over. Could you let it go? Now. And for most of us, that's not very hard. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that it can be just as easy to let go of what we would consider a troubling emotion. So let's play with this idea. After this demonstration, I will give you a sense of what I think is going on in here, or at least part of the mechanism of what I think is going on here and why it works. But sometimes it doesn't really matter why it works if you just know a way to do these kinds of things. So I want you now just to experience before I ask you to experience an emotion, the Sedona Method has 3 main questions. And those are the thing that actually leads through the actual practice. The questions go like this. Could you let it go? Would you let it go? And when? Now, when I ask you, could you let it go, that's back to that $1 million example I was talking about. Could you, is it possible for your nervous system to let go of that experience, of that emotion? So the answer to that one is always yes. Would you let it go might not have the answer yes. If you're feeling angry at a boss or some other circumstance or person, you might not be willing to let it go. And that's okay if you answer no to that second question. But then I'm going to prompt you with a third question. When? And that can be really eye-opening, particularly for emotions we're not willing to let go of, because we realize what those conditions are that we're attaching to them, what kind of story we're telling ourselves about what has to happen for us to feel better. And the trick of this, one of the fun things about this, is that oftentimes you'll wind up releasing anyway, even if you say no. So, let's play with this as an example, okay? I want you to think of some kind of emotion, some kind of maybe less than pleasant emotion that you'd like to let go of. Don't pick the worst thing in the world. Maybe start with a mild frustration, or if you're experiencing some kind of anger or frustration now, just notice that feeling. Just let that feeling be there for a moment. Notice where you experience that. What are the sensations in your body? Maybe other thoughts, things you're saying to yourself in your head, or images that go along with that. And could you just let them be there for just a moment? And here we go. Could you let it go? And would you let it go? When? And just let go. Let go as much as you can right now. Just release. Just imagine opening up inside. And notice what's different. And whatever that sensation you're experiencing now, I just want you to allow yourself to experience that now. Could you let that be there for a moment? Could you let that go? Would you let it go? When? Just let it go. Remember that feeling of releasing? And then finally, one more time, just notice whatever's left of that feeling. Notice what's different. And then could you let that feeling, could you just let that be there for a moment? Anything that goes along with it, any of those sensations or thoughts. And finally, could you let it go? Would you let it go? And when? More and more, just let go. And that is a basic tour of the Sedona Method, the question-led version of the Sedona Method. And there are several approaches to this, and I invite you to experiment in your own time, with your own pacing, not necessarily with this video. Just remember those 3 questions and just play with some things and see what happens. See if you can give yourself a little more freedom from an emotion that might have been holding you down before. All right, and so here's what I think is at least partially going on. In previous videos, I mentioned the idea of questions and how they can lead the mind. And if you ask certain questions, your mind is going to attempt to produce answers to those questions. So if the questions are about, could you let it go? Would you let it go? When? I believe those questions themselves are prompting that part of your mind to be able to let that go. But I think something else is happening. And it has to do with this. And I don't know, but it's my suspicion that this helps, that this physically letting go helps. Because what you're doing is actually creating an experience in the body and the nervous system of release. And by giving your mind some kind of a hook to hang that on, that experience of letting go, I think you're actually helping to condition this in as a response to make the technique more effective. So if you didn't do it the first time, I would invite you to actually do this with the object if you didn't already notice a change. And play with this on your own time. And if you're more curious, I'd invite you to go ahead on YouTube. There's the Sedona Method movie, I believe is what it's called. And Hale Dwoskin gets into the technique of what they call triple welcoming. And there are a few other techniques out there that deal with this same method, the same idea of letting go of these burdensome emotions. And the idea presented by Lester Levenson and Hale Dwoskin is this notion that when we're free from these negative, burdensome emotions, we are naturally happy. We're naturally creative. We're naturally loving and compassionate when we're not being burdened down by those things. And so by being able to let go of those things, we can return to a natural state of peace. Go ahead and give this a whirl. All this stuff only works if you actually take it for a spin. Some of these things are going to be more effective for you than others. I hope this one has been valuable for you. If you've got any questions that you'd like to talk to me about, feel free to swing by whiterabbithypnosis.com, where you can also book a free consultation call to talk to me about anything that you might be interested in dealing with from a hypnotic perspective in our sessions together. I wish you all the best out there in this crazy world. Be seeing you.